Hello and welcome to the Little Knowledge podcast, where this time we are talking about Llangibby, some say Llangibby Castle, and a lot to go through today. The notorious murders of 1878. Goff will be examining those later on. And I'll be looking at the dashing Sir Trevor Williams, one of the main figures of the Civil War in this era, and a rather bizarre character who takes over in the 20th century. So all that to look at. My name's Paul Busby, and with me as ever is Goff Morgan. Hello, Goff.
Hello, everybody. Greetings, Joe. How are we
Keeping
doing?
Cool?
Oh, gosh, yes. You can see the fan blowing cheerfully away in the background there. It's about keeping it down. Yes, it's one of our warmer sessions, I think, this one, isn't it? Oof.
I think so. I think the ones this time last year, because our first podcast was last year, July the 8th. So we're just over a year into these sorts of things.
Oh, good Lord.
And if you ever look back at those, we do look slightly frazzled. Well, it must have been very warm this time last year as well. So what is it now? About 29, 30, I think. So
Oh, yes, it's
fans have a job to do this time, don't they?
Yep.
So Llangibby, what do you think? It's quite close to where we both live. Have you
driven through it many times?
Yeah.
Driven past the White Hun Inn many times. On the way there, I must admit, I have never spotted Llangibby Castle.
Oh, yeah.
There was one particularly. I knew the little village and the town area. I did once with my aged father, God love him, go to there and attempt to wander around in a field and attempt to find a standing stone, which is marked on the map. So we squished around through a squishy field that was not entirely full of just mud. And
Oh dear.
I couldn't find it anywhere. So that was my major brush with history in Llangibby.
Well, actually, it's not your fault that you didn't find the castle, because mostly today it's on private land. So it's not that easy to sort of just walk on. But anyway, we're going to have a little look at it. So we'll start off with a map. It's always the best way to do it, isn't it?
I like map.
We like maps. So here we are. Now, Llangibby, for those that don't know, of course, is about 3 miles south of us and about 5 miles north of Cillian. So we've got our usual sort of late 19th, early 20th century map here. We've got Llangibby here, and we shall zoom in on the area. This is the main road here, Goff, where the pub is.
Oh, right.
There's the church, St. Cubby's, and that's where the name comes from. So although it's Llangibby, it is actually, the Welsh is far more accurate. It's the Church of Cubby. So Llangibby rather than anything else. Yeah. But it kind of moved to Llangibby. So Llangibby, whichever's your poison, really. And you go up here, and the pub is around here. The White Hart that you mentioned. And then we get to here.
Oh, yeah.
And what we actually have, where it says Bowling Green, this is an early Mott and Bailey castle that became a Bowling Green in later years, known as the Castle of Tregrug. Castle of Tregrug. And that's sort of 12th century. It's mentioned for the first time, the Castle of Tregrug, in 1262 by the Earl of Hereford, and he worked for the de Clares, for Gilbert de Clare, who built Caerphilly Castle, and who owned this land at the time. In fact, it was said that he passed Tregrug on to his brother, the wonderful Bogo de Clare. Bogo. He had many, many jobs. He was Chancellor of Llandaff. He was Treasurer of York. His CV went on for several miles on parchment, old Bogo. And so here it is. So we've got a castle here, the old one. Yeah. And then that appears to have been attacked at various times as well, because we're told in 1301, there's a payment for 43 shillings and sixpence for the repair and rebuilding a certain tower damaged in the war. It might have been the uprising by Madog ap Llywelyn in 1294, where Sir Morgan ap Meredydd, the rebel, who is the ancestor of the Morgans of Tredigga, was very active in this area. So we've got the old castle there, and then the de Clares appear to have built a new castle, again initially called Tregrug, later Llangibby Castle here, and it is rather enormous. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second, but you've got the old castle, the new castle, and right in the middle is a country house called Llangibby Castle.
Oh, right. Oh, interesting.
And if we do our usual little thing to show how it looks today.
Perfectly between the two.
Here we are. So this is where the old castle was.
Yeah, completely over.
This is where the new castle was, early 14th century de Clare Castle. And I'm afraid the mansion is gone.
Oh, right.
That's where the mansion used to be. Yeah. You find out a fair little bit about this enormous. This is enormous. It's about 500 feet by 250 feet, this castle, which would make it one of the largest castles in England and Wales. So the fact that you couldn't find it, Goff, again, today is not your fault because it's in private land and overgrown, but it would have been impossible to miss in the early 14th century, wouldn't it?
Right, yeah.
Now, if we have a little look at some of the things that are left of the castle. Llangibby Castle. So here we are.
Oh, that's still quite substantial, isn't it?
Yeah. So we've got bits still left. The great gatehouse.
Yeah.
Got various archways here. It's very nice. You can see here. Very nice sort of little detail. So there's a lot. But if you actually look at the plan of the castle, what people could not work out is you have the Lord's Tower here.
Yeah.
You have the gatehouse here, and you have nothing in the middle.
No.
And when people have looked and examined it, they couldn't find anything major in the middle. So you've got this enormous space.
So there never was a keep as such in the middle.
Very deep. No one's found any trace of it. We know that the Great Gatehouse was built in 1307, the Lord's Tower, 1318 to 1321. We know new lodgings were built, 1341 to 42, but then nobody is sure. A lot of people presume it was unfinished.
Yeah.
However, in about 12 years ago, Time Team turned up to have a little look at Tregrug.
Do you know, I was wondering it because the part of the shots you showed me struck a chord. I've seen these somewhere.
Yeah, well, you were quite right. And they produced a report, Wessex Archaeology afterwards, which is wonderfully detailed and a new idea and a new reason. That maybe not so much unfinished. They believe that it was essentially a hunting lodge. It was a pleasance. It was pleasure grounds.
Oh, right.
So whether the initial building, they decided then not to complete the castle and to turn it into pleasure grounds, we're not sure. But it's a very ornate, according to them, hunting lodge. Now, in later years, as we'll go into, in the Civil War, it was actually fortified, the castle. So they had to sort of patch it up and fortify and actually turn it into a fortification, but it may not have been that originally, which I think is quite interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Now, we saw that little, there was a little, the mansion that has disappeared between the two castles. Well, that was granted to Sir Roger ap William, who took the surname Williams. And Sir Roger Williams, this is about 1554, 1555, he knew the Earl of Pembroke. Very good if you knew the Earl of Pembroke back then. And he was granted the land. And he built, we assume, the mansion there. None of the Elizabethans seem to survive into later years, if the house. So we don't know. Someone even said maybe his mansion was inside the grounds of Tregrug Castle. But again, that wasn't proven. You would have thought that you would have found some remnants, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Of a mansion within those walls.
Yeah.
Other people think the walls were left there because even if it was a pleasure grounds, it was still a good meeting place for armies. And, you know, you're still walled in, you're still relatively safe. It's sort of like maybe a marching grounds, a parade ground, something like that. Now, as far as the 1550s go and the new Llangibby mansion, Llangibby house, Llangibby castle, new castle, call it what you will, there actually is a man called Thomas Churchyard. Have you heard of him? He was an Elizabethan poet.
No, I haven't.
Thomas Churchyard mentions quite a few things about Wales. And he writes this in 1587. Let's get rid of Tony. Upon a mighty hill, Llangibby stands, a castle once of state, and where there is some buildings new of late, a wholesome place, a passing flat of ground, as good an air as thereabouts found. It seems to sight the seat was placed so well, in elder days some duke therein did dwell.
Oh, right.
So new buildings.
Yeah.
That's clearly the new mansion that they're talking about there. Yeah, new buildings.
Some duke. Anyway,
some duke. Again, they're not entirely sure. We start to get more into it when we get into Sir Roger's grandson, the famous Sir Trevor Williams. And Sir Trevor Williams is extremely famous and well known for his parts in the Civil War. So why not get this gentleman up, King Charles I, as an illumination of this, since we do not have a portrait of Sir Trevor Williams, unfortunately.
Oh, right.
Now, in 1640... Sorry, go on.
Pair of shoes.
Oh, yeah. You can tell he's the king, can't you?
Well, oh, yeah. Only a king would have shoes like that, let's be fair.
Now, Sir Trevor is actually one of my favourite characters. He's a wonderful character. He was created a baronet in September 1642, so about a month before the Battle of Edge Hill and the Civil War kicks off. His father was a Puritan, but he's in very royalist Monmouthshire, so he's got to be slightly careful. He's married Elizabeth Morgan of Macon, so his brother-in-law is the William Morgan who built Tregrug House, the red brick Tregrug House. So he has connections.
Yeah.
He's very active early on. By the way, I'm glad that he was made a baronet by King Charles I deliberately, because he made so many people knights and baronets before the Battle of Edge Hill that he actually once knighted the wrong man. King Charles I. Anyone was passing, sword on the shoulder, there you go. Please love me.
I'm just delivering the post.
It's the postman of Edge Hill.
Yeah.
So Trevor was captured at the siege of Hynham, and he then seems to have come back to Llangybi and decided to fortify the old castle.
Right.
So he fortifies it, he makes it strong, he makes it a very difficult place to attack, apparently. And he puts 60 men in there, so he garrisons the castle. So he's prepared for whatever might go wrong. So he is a royalist up to a point. When 1645 comes along, Sir Trevor sends a message to Parliament that he would deliver Monmouthshire to Parliament if he is given an illustrious command over the region.
Oh, hello.
Also, he says he disliked popery. So, and he was never getting on well with the Somersets, the Marquesses of Worcester at Raglan Castle, who were, of course, the great Catholic family in this area. So then he modifies it ever so slightly, and he says that he's for both king and parliament. A wonderful fence-straddling act.
Yeah.
He was one of the clubmen, the clubmen movement. Now, clubmen were vigilantes who were going to defend their area against the excesses of both royalists and parliamentarian troops.
Oh, right.
So there'll be none of this here. And he was ahead of 1,700 clubmen. So he had quite a lot around him. King Charles I heard this and imprisoned him, ordered his arrest. At this, Sir Trevor Williams sobbed piteously and was so convincing, it was said that he chewed his treason, and even though everybody told King Charles not to do so, he granted bail to Sir Trevor Williams.
Oh.
Sir Trevor Williams then merrily attacks Monmouth Castle and hands it over to Parliament. King Charles is kicking himself now, isn't he? Oh. Then Sir Trevor heads off to join the merry siege against his enemies, the Somerset family, at the siege of Raglan Castle. He's there as well. So he really is, you would have thought now, a fully blown parliamentarian. And he has illustrious plans for what he wants to do militarily in Monmouthshire. And he tells the parliamentarians this, and the parliamentarians poo-poo him. Yeah. That's a bad thing to do to Sir Trevor Williams, who already appears to be something of a weather vane if you offend him slightly. And sure enough, in 1648, he joins with Sir Nicholas Kemmis of Kevin Mabley and plots to attack and take Chepstow Castle. Which he does, and Chepstow Castle falls. It was said that he one of the reasons he did this was he wasn't a fan of the rise of Cromwell, and that Cromwell was giving himself or being awarded manors in Glamorgan and in Monmouthshire, including Chepstow Castle. He was convinced Cromwell had his eye on Chepstow Castle, and Sir Trevor had his own eye on Chepstow Castle, and that was enough. So he helped capture it himself.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, any idea that this cunning plotting of Sir Trevor Williams could fly under the radar and he could continue his clubmen image appears to have collapsed with a letter written by this man that has survived. It is a letter to Major Thomas Saunders at Brecknock. We have plain discoveries that Sir Trevor Williams of Llangybi, about 2 miles from Usk in the county of Monmouth, was very deep in the plot of betraying Chepstow Castle, so that we are out of doubt of his guiltiness thereof. I do authorize you to seize him. Also the High Sheriff of Monmouth, Mr. Morgan, who was in the same plot. But because Sir Trevor Williams is the more dangerous man by far, I would have you seize him first, and the other will easily be had. I think fit to give you some characters of the man and some intimations as to how things stand. He is a man, as I am informed, full of craft and subtlety, very bold and resolute, have a house at Llangybi, well stored with arms and very strong. His neighbours about him very malignant, and much for him, who are apt to rescue him if apprehended. If you seize this person, disarm his house, but let not his arms be embezzled. Oliver Cromwell.
Oh.
Interesting that they're still treating him with such respect, Sir Trevor Williams, when he just stabs everyone in the back.
Well, it's interesting, and they know that he's actually a clever bloke. So you've got to treat him carefully, and you don't want to cause him any more offence, or he'll just jump ship again to the other side again and take another castle. Because anywhere he gets involved in, he does actually seem to manage to take, doesn't he?
He's quite effective, isn't he, with his army of clubmen?
Clubmen, 1,000 clubmen. I mean, I've never heard of that.
Oh yeah, just a bunch of vigilantes. But you'd need it. I mean, you'd need to protect your area from the excesses of both sides, wouldn't you? Anyway, after obviously Chepstow, as we've talked about, Nicholas Kemmis gets killed, Chepstow Castle falls to the Parliamentarians, and we know Cromwell wins the war. Sir Trevor Williams, again, they treat him with respect, because in 1652, he is discharged from sequestration. So they haven't punished him, really.
No.
So he's still there, and and then he's still around.
That means they don't confiscate his properties and lands then.
Yeah.
If discharged from it, it means none of his property is taken off him, he's just left there.
That's right. Which they sometimes did with powerful people they thought they could control.
Well, that's it.
That they weren't a threat. And of course, Sir Trevor seemed to, he might have gone both sides, but his father was a Puritan, so presumably the Williams family were known for Puritanism. This all must have worked in his favour, I suppose.
Yeah.
But as he continued, he became an MP, and the Restoration, Charles II treated him well as also. So he seems to have navigated this pretty well, actually, Sir Trevor Williams.
Oh, yeah.
But he never really got over the animosity he felt towards the Somerset family, the Marquises of Worcester, later the first Duke of Beaufort that you see here, who's popped up a fair bit in these podcasts, hasn't he?
Yes, you see a lot of the Beauforts.
Now, Williams took John Arnold of Llanfihangel and William Morgan of Tredegar's side against the Duke of Beaufort, the anti-Catholic side in particular. Sir Trevor Williams was quoted as saying when he became an MP, half of Monmouthshire were papists. There were more priests than clergymen. A bit of an exaggeration, but there was something, as we've learned, to actually base that on, wasn't there?
Yeah, it was a very, very Catholic area.
Well, Williams's view of the first Duke of Beaufort was, he is a man so rotten in his principles to have such a command, you may all have your throats cut, he told the other MPs without any alarum at all. And he was just a pain all the way through to the Duke of Beaufort. And I guess there are limits. And again, the Duke of Beaufort ended up with Chepstow Castle.
Yeah.
And you get the feeling that he really wanted Chepstow Castle, did Sir Trevor Williams.
Yeah.
So he continues sort of picking at this, and he accuses the garrison of Chepstow Castle of being all papists. So he's attacking Beaufort as much as possible. But it's personal as well. And there's this wonderful quote when he retires and he comes back to Llangybi. And there's this lovely quote. He's just a troublemaker from beginning to end, Sir Trevor Williams, because it says, Williams continues a firebrand. He has most of the youth of the county at his command to attend the drinking of barrels of ale, where he plots his roguery, the needy and indebted by endeavouring his unlawful stirs. He's in a pub with a, whipping up the populace, and the young love him.
I know, yeah.
It all comes to a bit of an end, however, when he finally goes too far, and the first Duke of Beaufort gets him essentially for libel on scandalum magnatum, where he's fined £20,000. That's enough to shut your mouth back in the 1680s, isn't it?
That's an astonishing amount for that period. Oh, that's countless millions, isn't it, in today's time?
And he ends up in our old friend King's Bench prison. So, poor old Sir Trevor. That's how it all ended for him.
Oh, right, gosh. So he never got out then?
Oh, he did get out eventually, but he didn't get back into public life, and he died in 1692. Now, although I quite like him, I do not like his grandson, also MP, Sir Hopton Williams. And here you see it says Llangibby, interestingly.
Okay. Yeah.
So whether they've rebuilt, this is clearly maybe in the late 17th century, they rebuilt it, early 18th century facade. This is how the house between the two castles looked. So it's quite an extensive mansion. It had about 14 bedrooms, I think it was later said. So it's a very large place. Now, Sir Hopton Williams is very unpleasant. He married a lady called Frances and wasn't just a faithless husband. He was often reviling, abusing, beating, kicking her, and threatening to murder her.
What a charmer.
1680s, he had an affair with the butcher's wife in Llangybi. And at this point, he decided to Frances to separate. He put her and his two children in a separate house, and he offered her £5 per year to separate for good. And quite rightly, she refused that. £5 per year.
I would say £5 a year?
It's an insult, isn't it?
Well, it is. When you consider she must have brought us a dowry to the property as well. A lot of the marriages had prenups and goodness what else. £5? Me.
It's an insult. He moved to Westminster, where he lived with a woman called Anne Warner, and appears to have beaten her up too. So he's a real charmer, is Sir Hopton Williams MP. When he succeeded to Llangibby, she decided that this was the chance now to get a proper divorce. He's got a lot of money now. He's got a large estate. So without him knowing, she moves to Usk, where she lives in a house in Usk. He finds out about it and sells off all her furniture and household goods, making her destitute once again.
Oh, what a piece of work.
Vote for Sir Hopton Williams, ladies and gentlemen, your Member of Parliament.
Yeah. You're utter swine candidate. Oh, God.
Yes. In the end, things go quiet. So they think there was an out-of-court settlement. So hopefully Francis had a happier life without him at the end. One thing he has left, which is still here, is an avenue of Scots pine, which he laid, and you can see it here. That's still some avenue today, isn't it?
Isn't it? Yeah.
So the house used to be around here, and it stretches all the way to the River Usk.
Gosh.
But it's a little like Trigger's Broom, because I don't think there's a single original tree there left. Right. So it is Sir Hopton's Drive, but it's been altered many, many times. But what an unpleasant character.
Oh, he's special, isn't he?
Money was clearly a problem because the estate was mortgaged to the hilt in the 18th century to John Hanbury of Pontypool Park. And they think they mortgaged it so they could build the mansion. A bit risky, I think.
Yeah.
And they didn't pay it off until 1761. So it was a pretty big mortgage. They always seem to be struggling for money, the Williamses. That's how it looked, a photograph of the mansion in later years. The family did die out in the male line in 1781 when Ellen was the only one left. And Ellen had married a William Adams of Monmouth. So the family changed the name to a name you might have seen in various historical documents, Goff Adams Williams. It's the double-barreled Adams Williams. And I think you might have heard, certainly you would have heard of one of them. He was an MP at the time of the Chartist rising. William Adams Williams, MP.
Oh, right.
He became MP for Monmouth in 1831, about the time when Sir Charles Morgan turned it in and retired. He was a very pro-reform MP. He thought the Reform Act didn't go far enough, in fact.
Yeah.
This was a sketch which has recently been put back on display in Newport Art Gallery by Mullock, and it shows Adams Williams at the Chartist trial.
Oh, right.
But even at this time, it said that Llangibby estate is heavily mortgaged. So they're really sort of struggling. There's one black mark against William Adams Williams, and that is that he was the man who called Thomas Prothero my dear prize fighter.
Oh, oh, is it?
So he was another one, perhaps, who thought he could control the vicious beast that was Thomas Prothero, Sir Charles Morgan's villainous agent from Malpas Court, for those of you who are unfamiliar with who he was.
Yeah, you know the circumstance of that story, don't you? Why he called Prothero a prize fighter. Prothero was a magistrate at the time, and Prothero's brother had got beaten up by someone. And so Prothero called the chap who was suspected of beating this chap up, and rather than, arresting him, called him to his house in Newport and just beat him unconscious in the hallway of his house. While being town clerk and goodness knows what else. So that's why this guy wrote about it to say, my dear prize fighter, because he just beaten the bloke in senseless in his living room.
Well, unlike Prothero, it's safe to say, or it appears to be, that William Adams Williams was definitely shaken by the Chartist rising. This is a very pro-reform MP, remember? And it really affected his health. So those people dying in Newport, and it really seems to have affected him very badly, so much so that his health declined and he retired in 1841. Although it was seen that he would easily have perhaps won re-election, he decided he'd had enough, and he went back to Llangybi, and he lived a more peaceful life for the rest of his days. He lived for another 20 years.
Oh, gosh.
Dying in 1861. And there was a sort of a string of 3 William Adams Williamses, so it's very confusing. But it's when his son was in charge of Llangybi that we come to 1878. Something extraordinarily unpleasant happened. Goff, as you will tell us.
As you know, I tend to do the sort of true crime things here, and we've come across some very, very nasty cases. The Llangibby murder is murders, because there's plural, is probably one of the most unpleasant cases that we've looked at in this series of podcasts. It's a perfectly horrible situation. Let me just sort of call up some of the pictures. If I can do a screen share on, I can show you where we are.
Yes, it certainly was very unpleasant. It's still talked about.
It's July the 18th, 1878, as you can see from this picture. Scene of the Llangibby tragedy, as it's referred to.
Those policemen outside?
Yes. Now, this is quite interesting. I'll come back to the who may or may not be in this picture in a moment or two. But you see, you've got the policemen at the front. Essentially, the house was lived in. Oh, just find my notes here so I get it absolutely right. They said the crime was perpetuated in the still hours of the early dawn, and the first sign that anything unusual had occurred seems to have been observed by a little lad named Frank James, who had been working on the day previous with the head of the household, head of the little household, William Watkins, hoeing swede at Cum Farm. The boy went according to appointment to call Watkins, and it was noticed at the farm close by that he was unusually late that morning. A fearful sight met little Frank's gaze when he reached the gate of the small garden through which there is a path leading up to the cottage door. Happily for the little fellow, he did not grasp the fearfulness of the scene. He ran away and told his mother that a man was asleep in the garden. The impression that something was wrong seems to have been gathered from the scared expression on the lad's face. And Mr. E. George of the White Hart Inn, Mr. Day, and several others were brought with speed to the spot. What they saw will, perhaps, be best told in the words of Mr. George, who, in reply to interrogatories, communicated the following statement to our reporter. Mr. George then goes on to essentially explain that they entered the property, the garden, which you can see, they went through the gate, up into the gate. Behind there, they found William Watkins dead, having been stabbed, his throat cut. His wife had also been stabbed twice in the back, and her throat he was also dead on the ground. Smoke was pouring out of the roof. So they attempted to gain entrance. Upon opening the door, they said there was this horrible stench of sulfur, which nobody ever seems to comment on for some reason. So they got a ladder, climbed. I don't know what. No, that it's never referred to again. They climb up a ladder onto the roof, smash some tiles in to let the smoke out, and then they eventually enter. The place is an absolute wreck. It looks like a lot of furniture and broken stuff has been piled up in the middle of the room. A clock has been sort of shattered. Somebody's pulled the pendulum out, thrown the face away. Why that was done, who knows? But the worst thing is they go upstairs and the three children, hang on, I've got their ages. Let me just double check their ages. Very young children. The youngest one was 4, oldest one was 8. 8, 5, and 3, I beg your pardon. Had been stabbed. 2 of them were found dead in bed and one underneath the bed. Now, the reporting of the time is horribly graphic in detail. I don't propose to go into that here. If you want to look up, there's lots of information online to find if you want to go into the full gruesome byblowes of this horrible story. There are some peculiarities. Watkins's body appears to be laid out and arranged on the ground. He's not wearing any shoes. One of the first people in the house said they saw a prints on the step of a foot not wearing shoes, or a lady wearing a light shoe or something along this line. So there's some indication that he may have come out of the house without his shoes on, or the shoes were taken afterwards. But his body is laid out, and across both bodies of the wife and the husband, flowers are scattered. Sweet williams are scattered over the body. This is worth thinking about, because it again never crops up again in anywhere else. But this is a telling incident in many respects. I think, looking at this picture in front of us, the little chap between the two guys there, that is Frank James, I think. It's more than likely. Now, whether this was taken, I think it was probably taken sometime after July the 18th, because July the 18th was when the murder took place, which would mean that the bodies of the individuals are still in the house when the police are guarding it. But the police would have guarded the property for a long time, because as usual, news of this spread, and it becomes a complete tourist attraction. Everybody comes flooding up to have a look. Again, the police turn up once they're summoned from town. Major Herbert and people like the superintendent, every time they turn up. First thing they do, of course, is take the children out of the bed and put them down safe somewhere else. Move the bodies in from the garden and take them. So they basically destroy the crime scene instantly, which seems to be the pattern of what was done at the time. And then, of course, they just let the public in to have a look. So the public come in and trample all over the place. One of the great telling details that the public found absolutely fascinating was the fact that blood was pooling in the path and running down into the road. They thought that was quite thrilling, but a bizarre use of word, but yeah, that word crops up in the stories. So this becomes a great case of trouble. Now, around the scene at this time, there are rumours of individuals, tramps, and we're seen moving for the area. There were supposed to be 2 sailors seen. One character who some people refer to as a loony was seen in the area. Eventually, the police home in on, let me just go back down here. The police home in on this gentleman. This is Yusuf or Joseph Garcia, and he was a 21-year-old Spanish sailor. And he's ultimately, he's seen around the area. He's seen asleep under a hedge. He calls into a lady, Mrs. Watkins, and asks for water. He'd had that morning of the murder been released from prison. Basically, when he came out of prison, they dressed nicely. So there's full details of what he had been wearing when he left: clean shirt, trousers, pair of shoes, etc. They also were going to give them money to get somewhere, because they didn't just let you out on your uppers. You had to give you some money to get away. But by the time the warder had come back to give him the money, he'd left. And there's There was a lot of debate about this at the time. It's the reason for him, fleeing the scene. The truth of the matter is, he was a Spanish speaker who spoke no English. So it's very possible he just didn't understand a word that was being said to him on the day. Even when he's at Mrs. Watkins asking for water, they're communicating mostly by hand gestures and pointing, because he's indicating that he wants to head towards Newport. So eventually, at 3 o'clock in the following morning, or over 24 hours later, after the search of the area, he's arrested by a PC McGrath at Newport Station. He has bundles of items with him. He's overdressed in 2 pairs of trousers. He's wearing a pair of watertight boots, which are not his own. And though the papers at the time claimed that he was saturated in blood, that's not the case. He did have a blood stain on a shirt which had attempted to be washed out. So they arrest him, and he becomes, from that point on, the murderer.
Do they know? Do they know whether it was human blood, or I guess they assumed it was human blood?
Come back to that.
Okay.
Basically, from this point on, he did it. There is no question in the mind. So by the time you get to the following day, when we get to our own usual times, of when we get onto the coroner's area. Am I looking in the right one? Let me just check here now.
The inquest is in a pub again, isn't it, Goff?
Okay, yeah. Mr. W.H. Brewer, the coroner, holds the inquest again in the White Hart Inn, Llangibby. Quick, straight into the pub, have a quick go. And this is basically what the coroner says. And this is really quite astonishing. He says, this is the most fearful case, a case I think I never had anything in any county like it. I don't remember ever having heard of such a dreadful affair. Of course, gentlemen, as far as we are able to judge the man who is in custody, who committed this act. Of course, we can't tell that as yet, but still I believe so. I saw him at Cullean this morning, and he seems to be a very little bit of a small fellow. The man Watkins might have knocked him down if he had been prepared for it, but I have no doubt the poor man was taken unawares and killed, and his wife, I have no doubt, in trying to protect the husband, was killed also, and the murderer afterwards killed the children and set fire to them and the house. So I understand. I mean, I know nothing of it. I have not seen it yet, but I should fancy so. We will now go and view and then come back again. I hope we shall be able to finish the inquiry today. I don't see why we should not. So basically, he has convicted that man already without even having visited with the coroner's jury the scene of the crime. Or viewed the body.
He's fairly sure.
He's very sure. I have no doubt, really.
No doubt.
And they talked about the fanciful scenario of how the murder was done. And they even take into account that, because he was a very small guy. He wasn't a big chap. He's about 5'5", 5'6", slightly built. 21 years of age, Joseph. And you think, well, this is it. He's just done instantly. So again, they go through all the usual notes and inquiries. They do have an interesting moment when they are questioning a doctor who has examined bodies and various things. I can't find the doctor's name at the moment. Let me just wiggle through. And the doctor is addressing the question of the knife. Here he is, Mr. Donald Bolton, the surgeon at Usk. And he examines a post-mortem examination of William Watkins, and basically says that the knife that was found on Garcia could not have caused the injuries. It was too blunt. It was chipped. It was damaged. It was deep enough to cause the wound, but he doesn't think that the knife could have actually done it at all. So basically, he didn't have the knife. No, he does, however, Mary Ann Watkins, Watkins's daughter, because Watkins had about 6 children, only 3 of whom were living in the house with him and his wife. They go through all the possessions that Garcia has with him at Newport Station, and they essentially, she points out that they are all things that belong to her father or mother or her older sister. There were ties, blue ones, black ones, ties, boots, stockings, various items, pieces. One of the such things, a round-faced clock was there. Loaf of bread, which she claimed had actually been made by her mother. She is, of course, terribly distressed, and it does allow the papers and Dewey at the time to engage in that wonderful sentimentality of the Victorian papers, where they describe at length the poor girl's distress and how one of the wardens says, "Oh, let her weep a little." And there were tears in the eyes of the jury. There's one line which struck me as slightly odd. You said one elderly gentleman in the jury pretended to be asleep, so he didn't have to. And yes, come on. So one old bloke nodded off in the middle and then tried to claim he was too distressed to listen. But so basically, they from this point on, they're absolutely convinced that he did it. There isn't even a trial at this point. A surgeon at the prison who examined the sediment at Clean talk about scratches and various things upon the body, none of which are deep enough to have been caused in a fight or an injury. Most of the scratches are where he seems to have gone through a hedge at one point and gone through. But that doesn't particularly matter at this point because he's the murderer and they've got him. Now, this, of course, becomes an absolute tourist attraction. People are traveling for miles to see this. Crowds are turning up. There's a case eventually where he says, curiosity gratified at public cost. The now notorious cottage on the roadside still continues to be visited by people from Newport and surrounding districts. A number of men sought relief at Newport on Wednesday night. That means they've gone in, the police station asked to be put up overnight, because they had walked from us, having paid a visit to the ill-fated house. They admitted to the police having come from Cardiff. And the theory appeared to be that after quitting Llangybi, they obtained relief at Usk for one night and then came to Newport to get a second night's rest on the way home. So this is drawing in massive crowds. It also caused a degree of terror of tramps in the area. There's this wonderful letter saying, "Sir, the tramping system has become a crying evil in many places in South Wales, and it is high time that the custom of allowing gangs of desperate men to prowl about the country should be suppressed." Because again, he was saying that there were tramp figures in the area as well, 2 or 3 people on the tramp, 2 or 3 soldiers. And it's full of all these wonderful gossip, and these waifs are to be met in our highways, bylanes, and lonely paths daily. A county policeman informed me that he had found one night not less than 8 stalwart and savage-looking fellows in the flue of an oven at one of the works. So I mean, they whip up this sort of fear of dangerous tramps marauding the area, even though Garcia is not a tramp. He was a sailor who got arrested for housebreaking and has just that day come out of prison. But the papers aren't too worried about that because, again, this part of that background of fear of not only the foreign but the itinerant through your area. They were seen as, threats and dangers and things along these lines. Eventually, they get to the assizes. It's perfectly clear that the chap trying to sort of put the case for Garcia is that he doesn't speak a word of English. So it's absolutely quite astonishing. At one point, they say to him, do you understand? How do you plead? Here we go. The clerk who arraigned addressed the prisoner, Joseph Garcia. Do you understand English? The prisoner does not answer, and he is put back in, while the other criminal business is proceeded with, and the interpreter has not yet arrived. The court rises for luncheon. After luncheon, there's a great crowd in court. Prisoner is brought up again and placed in the dock. Mr. Bosanquet, who's the prosecutor, appears for the prosecution. Mr. Maddy appears for the defense. After 5 minutes, eventually they get a translator, and it was put the question, are you guilty or not guilty, to which the prisoner replies in Spanish, not guilty. Now, of course, Mr. Maddy, who's the defense solicitor, at this point, remember, people charged with crimes are not allowed to speak for themselves. He says that basically they haven't literally had time to put together any defense for Garcia at all. They can't communicate him with properly because there isn't anybody that can translate. So they really need it put back. They're also worried that because of the general feeling in the county that it would be very, very difficult for him to actually get a fair hearing at this point. Now, the judge takes exception to this. There are various sort of cases put forward trying to prove this, on the grounds that the class of men who would make up a jury for this trial are not the sort of people to be influenced by public opinion, which I think is very nice. But he does actually defer the case on the grounds that they could not mount a proper defence in the time given to them. So it's put off until October. So it's the 3rd of August when it gets put off to October, and it's going to take place in Gloucester when eventually they get there. I think you dare to call it a trial, really. The Mr. Bosanquet essentially recites everything that we talk about in the murder. They tack all the case, all the things to see, while pointing out continually that there is no evidence to connect Garcia with the murder. It is clear that he has these possessions, but if you presume, one point, this is the presumption, that if you presume that the thief is the murderer and he has stolen these goods, he must be the murderer. I mean, I'm not sure that would hold up at the moment. But so that's the argument they're putting forward to this point. Eventually, they got the Mr. Maddie, who's attempting to defend him, really, does point out again all the facts we just talked about. There's nothing to locate him there. He says he doesn't see that there's any motive for the murder because he had a lot of money of him. He'd also concealed Spanish money on him when he went into prison by stitching it into clothing. So he had actually gold coins on him. He was not in any want. He was fully clothed. He didn't have any reason to steal this thing. What he thinks, Maddie puts forward, is that he discovers the bodies and then finds this the stuff away, and he just takes it. It possibly gets blood on him when he moves the body, and never explains why he moves the body to get things. And he takes the goods from besides the corpses. We'll come back to this as a defence. It doesn't necessarily come up. So eventually, the judge does a summing up. He's attempting to be equal sides, but it boils down to this. He says to the jury, "You are the judges of the facts in the case. Did this man murder William Watkins?" Because he's only trialed with the murder of William Watkins. "If you are satisfied, although no one saw him do it, you must pronounce it. That which goes most against him is this: the cottage was robbed and the stolen property was found upon the prisoner, and he can give no good account of it. If you are satisfied that man is the thief and the murderer is the same person, then he must say he is guilty. Now it rests with you to give your independent opinion with regard to the case of this man. If you are satisfied, you must say he is guilty. This is a matter of very great importance for society at large." The jury then consult with each other for 2 minutes. They don't even leave the jury box. Eventually, the foreman, the clerk of arraign says, "Have you agreed the verdict?" The foreman says, "Yes, we have." The clerk says, "How do you say? Is the prisoner guilty or not guilty?" And the foreman says, "Oh, we say he's guilty." And that's it. So that was it. The interpreter repeats the words that the judge says, "Joseph Garcia, you stand convicted of willful murder. What have you to say? That judgment to die according to law should not be pronounced." The interpreter repeats the words because the guy still hasn't got a clue what's going on, and replies that the prisoner says he doesn't know anything about it. And he's taken away, and that's it. Now, there are various interviews about him when he's actually held in, he's moved to Gloucester. It's very untactfully put in the papers at the time because they refer to evidence of idiocy. His behaviour, Garcia's behaviour is quite strange. He's very blankly unemotional. He seems to wander around the room in sense of distraction. He doesn't really clearly seem to understand what's going on for him. There are a number of sort of Spanish consuls and vice consuls actually within the Newport and Cardiff area, and they find a Spanish Catholic priest who goes and talks to him for quite a lot. But basically, when they explain to him that that the safe date of his execution was being fixed, he just says, "What for?" in a half indignant tone. Said that the reply given was that he must suffer the crime committed at Llangibby, and he at once declared that he was innocent of the crime. He said, "It is supposed that being a foreigner and ignorant of the inflexibility of the law on these solemn occasions, when no effort is made for his release and no plea uttered in his favour, he hopes that by holding out to the last,
he may persuade his jailers of his innocence and so escape his dreadful doom. I mean,
Well, that's
really,
one way of
again,
looking
that's
at
just a spin. That's one way of looking at it. But throughout, he never ever says other than he is innocent. He doesn't quite seem to grasp. He seems, yeah, the Signor Ancilla, who is the priest dealing with him, is quite convinced that he is innocent. He advises him at one point that he has to, confess. And he says, no, I will not confess. He said, they will kill me if they like. And they are going to kill me, but I never murdered any 5 people. I never went into the cottage. I don't remember seeing any 5 people, nor any cottage. And until the very end, he says he will confess for his sins, but he will not confess that he did that. But they do become progressively convinced during this period that he is someone suffering today what we would consider to be either learning difficulties or some form of mental health problem. Most likely, I mean, it seems from some of the behaviors that he may be possibly on the autistic spectrum in the way he responds to some things. So it's very odd. Yeah, it's a sad and tragic case. Eventually, you get to the execution. Obviously, it never happens. If you want to read about the execution in blow-by-blow detail, you can. But there is an interesting article in South Wales Daily Paper News at the time on the 19th of November, 1878. And again, quite an interesting little thing. The correspondent says, I have seen executions in public and executions in private, and I frankly confess that I do not know which of the two is the more disgusting and brutal. There are many features in public executions peculiarly repulsive, but do what you may, be as decent and as orderly as you can, make the best arrangements that are possible under the circumstances, and still the scene is vulgar, is low, is a travesty of what men call solemnity and justice. Murder is horrible, dress it up with what authority you like, and judicial murder is no exception to the rule. Now, this is a fascinating statement at the time, because you don't realize that there was this opposition to it. The execution is pathetic in the sense that it really is a horrible thing and sad thing to watch. He literally has to be dragged to the scaffold because he can't stand. The last words he more or less says to the priest who's with him is, will you please ask the Spanish consul to write to my mother? He continually claims his innocence, and eventually then the hangman pulls the thing and Marwood and drops him 8 foot. And he doesn't even break his neck, he just hangs there until he suffocates. And as soon as the drop fell, a black flag inscribed with the word justice is hoisted over the prison gates. Now, this is again where things take on an utterly ridiculous turn, as usual in public at this time. And the correspondent says, the execution formed a disgusting and offensive spectacle, but something more repulsive had yet to come. It became known by some means that Marwood was to leave by the 1:20 down train for Pontypool Road, and accordingly an immense crowd gathered around the jail gates to await his exit. This is the hangman. When he appeared, a hoarse shout of welcome and exultation went up, and a rush was made for the little man, who thus became a popular hero. The subject of this demonstration looked rather alarmed at first, but seeing that the crowd was in good humour, he put on a smiling face on the matter and submitted to his fate. A move having been made for the station, Marwood, accompanied by several turnkeys, was escorted by the boisterous crowd to the station. Arrived there, he held a semi-private levee in the waiting room. People filled the room and an excited throng pressed through the little courtyard, where, peeping through the window, they beheld the public executioner of England, smiling blandly, evidently in the best of humours, and answering a number of questions. Presently he came out on the platform, where he was again received with cheers. Marwood came forward, bowed, smiled, hat in hand. A rush was made at him. Dozens of people evincing the utmost eagerness to shake hands with him. 3 cheers for Marwood, shouted a bully who stood in the crowd, and his request was lustily complied with. Marwood thereupon bowed and smiled again. A gentleman expressed the sentiment that he wished he had brought a bottle of whiskey with him, and which Marwood says, gentlemen, he said, I am much obliged for this kind expression of feeling. I have never had such a flattering reception in all my life before, and I hope it will not be long before I come to ask again. Do you really want that said from the executioner. Doubts on Garcia's guilt surface very, very quickly. And there's a very interesting comment in the line about why you think it came about. And it said, this crime was not like that of an Englishman. And Garcia was not an Englishman. And it does seem to be there was a certain pattern, as they say. You arrest the brownest foreigner passing through the territory and stitch him up. It generally seems to happen. So he said that they give all the reasons for why he may not have done it, that he might have been weak-minded, he might have been done it. And they say that though they're quite convinced that it was correct, they put all the questions to let you make your own mind up on it. And it is quite an interestingly balanced. It's a horrible case all the way around. All the way around. It's reported lasciviously in the papers. These are the penny dreadfuls of the time. They've even, make sure that the man in the middle looks like Garcia. You can see you have the viewing the bodies of the coroners. You can see the parents, the viewing the bodies of the little children who are all in bed. The scene of the house, the murder, you can see there. And of course, then the funeral of the victims, which I didn't touch on at this occasion, but there was quite a lot about it in the papers at the time. And at the centre, the attack on Mrs. Watkins. This is all fiction. There's not a thread of any truth in that at all. They have a portrait of him on his way to the gallows. If you read the accounts in the papers, he, of course, looks nothing like that at all. But finally, you get to this, which is perhaps the truth of the matter, which almost gets secluded. This is the tombstone that was put up to the Watkins family who died at the time. And it says, memory of William Watkins, age 39, his wife Elizabeth, age 40, greatly respected, who with their 3 children, Charlotte, Alice, and Frederick, aged respectively 9, 5, and 4, were cruelly murdered July the 18th, 1878. Now that must have been erected by public subscription because the family were quite poor. There's no way that was funded by the Watkins family itself.
No, that's an expensive stone, isn't it?
But to say it again, this is the attitude best summed up just after the murder's announced. This crops up in the paper. Horrible tragedy near Newport. One of the most cruel murders ever recorded took place at Llangybi, near Newport on Wednesday, July the 17th, when a whole family, father, mother, and 3 children, were found murdered and the house ransacked and set on fire. Then, tamped quickly underneath, obviously because it's been covered after it went to press, a Spaniard named Garcia is committed for the crime. And then you have this ballad, which if you go to the pub, you can sing along with, to the tune of Poor Little Joe, which I have looked up the tune of. In the pub, you could get this in 4 of you, and to the tune of Little Joe, you could sing this song as a group. And the chorus is, poor little children weltering in gore, their parents lie dead near their own cottage door. All of them murdered so cruelly had been at the village of Llangybi, not far from Killeen. I mean, it's just, if you want to sew up the whole case, it's that, isn't it? It is it's shocking. Now,
definitely, yeah.
I'm not one, it's not up to me say in a way whether Garcia did it or not. My own feeling on the matter today, however, is that he would not have been found guilty today on the evidence that was presented at the time. The whole conviction hinges on him having possession of the goods that were taken from the house. There is no connection whatsoever to tie him to the murders. In fact, when questioned by the priest when he was in Gloucester jail as to where he got it, he said he found them bundled up in a hedge and took them. Now, this wasn't brought out at the trial. Maddie, his defense solicitor, constructs this story of him having taken things from the bodies while they were there, taken the boots off. This is never brought out. So what he says of having taken it away is possible. The murder had not long occurred. It may be likely that Frank James approached the house, disturbs whoever is in the way of getting off, and they chuck it in a hedge later to collect it. Also, it's
Okay.
entirely circumstantial. There is no connection at all. The blood on the clothing was analysed, but for some reason was also not brought out in the trial and was found they couldn't prove whether it was human blood or not.
Oh,
It
that
was
was
certainly not of sufficient amount to actually have killed someone by stabbing them through the carotid artery, and it may have actually been animal. Is that one case that it was animal?
right.
So you might have killed a rabbit or something. But I really think this was a miscarriage of justice. I
Well,
don't
that's good
think,
because, as I
don't
said,
think he could have done. I don't think you could possibly have not had doubts about that case, and he was not doubted because he was brown, and he was itinerant, and he was foreign.
okay, well, that is unfortunately, I think this should have been an episode on its own, but we've
Yeah.
really got to move on because we're running way over.
Okay,
Please continue.
Just before we go, right at the beginning, they talk about flowers on the body arranged and flowers scattered. The flowers were Sweet Williams on a man called Williams. Never mentioned at all. Carry on. That's it.
No. Please, I mean, for people who know about the case, please continue the conversation in the comments below because, yeah, I agree with you, Goff. I think it certainly would be an unsafe trial. There's no question or doubt about that. Whether he did it or not, as I've read lots of stuff by people who've ultimately come to the conclusion that he probably did, but I don't know enough of the case. What is absolutely certain is the trial is completely unsafe.
Oh, yeah.
And unfair. Now we're going to have to wrap it up, so I'm going to have to quickly go through the final bits of Llangibby. I should have known really that the murders should have been an episode of their own, but you live and learn, really, don't you? Let's have a little look. Oh.
What's the matter?
Oh, having trouble with that. There we are at last. What we've got here, after the 1860s, Llangibby House or Newcastle, whatever you want to call it, was let. The Adams Williamses, one of them, moved to India, and so they let the house. It was kind of winding down, perhaps, of a great estate. And these pictures are fascinating. They're on the People's Collection Wales website, and they were put together by a chap called Vernon Emmanuel, who collected lots of historical photographs relating to Wales, and his son Graham has put them on the site. And this is 1902 and a Llangibby house party. That's what they're labelled as, which is very interesting. He's also, Graham has colorized a few, which tends to make them pop quite a bit. So we'll have a little look through here, through some of these. Or maybe we won't. It's all frozen up on me. All frozen up on me.
The hot weather.
Something's wrong, isn't it? Oh, there we are. You see the colorized version?
No,
No?
I've just got the black and white showing.
Oh, forget that. That doesn't work at all then. It worked perfectly well earlier on. Such is life.
Things.
Let's see
Live
whether we can...
broadcasting.
At least you got the black and white version, I suppose.
Oh, there it is. There's the
There we
colour.
go. You saw the colorized one. Also got a vicar here. The Adams Williamses did move into the rectory nearby at one time when they let the house.
Oh,
It's quite interesting that they've managed to capture this. I mean, when it's colorized, it does make it certainly come to life, doesn't it?
yeah. That's much better than you think some of them, isn't it?
And here you can see, I mean, you've got these, but when they're colorized, it does sort of pop out of the screen.
Oh, yeah.
Now, it said it could be the Adams Williams family at Llangybi. It could be, but at that point, 1902, the man who was actually living in the house was a fascinating character called Dr. Frederick Rutherford Harris, who'd made his name. There's a card, possibly his, because Rutherford Harris had actually fallen out with Charles Stuart Rolls and actually sued him over the sale of a motor car. He wouldn't pay, basically. He wanted it, sent it back to alter it, then again, sent it back to alter it. And actually, whether it was divine intervention, his car actually ended up catching fire and the garage burnt down at Llangybi. So, but here he is. Father, there he is, Dr. Frederick Rutherford Harris, who'd made his name in South Africa. And quite a character over there. It was said that he clung to Cecil Rhodes' coattails until they came away.
Oh, God.
He worked as his secretary. He worked quite a bit over there. But it's interesting how the more you're with Dr. Rutherford Harris, the less you like him. He was accused of blackmail. He was accused of gun running in South Africa. Didn't stop him becoming a member of Parliament in South Africa, mind. But there's this wonderful thing. Now, this is what we got here. There's a chap who has met Harris, and initially the quotations are wonderful. I have a nice companion named Dr. Harris, an enthusiastic sportsman. This is June 1891. Harris is here and a great help, enormous energy. Then, as it said, late in 1891, while on a shooting trip with Middleton Jameson, Harrison was sunning himself on a rock in the Llangybi River, which you see here, after a morning swim, when he was taken in the rear by a crocodile. After Lana had come out from Salisbury, Harris was moved there to spend 3 weeks lying face downwards until his wounds healed.
Like face downwards until his wounds healed.
Unfortunately, then he spent then he spent a lot of time with Harris, and his opinion altered. Harris means well, but he really is a muddling ass. On the surface a genius, but under the crust as thick as they are made. And he says Harris is a damned nuisance, and it's getting worse and worse for Harris. Someone has actually said about Harris, what don't you like about him? And the reply was, Harris's unreliability, his criminal corruptness, his pathological mendacity, his love for double-crossing, intrigue, his disloyalty, his vain stupidity, and his arrogance.
Oh,
that does sum it up ever so slightly, doesn't it?
Go to his old mum.
He came to Llangibby where he was interested in greyhounds. That was his main thing. And he played the role with his loving wife, Florence, who really was devoted to him. He stood for Parliament and he won. Then it was overturned because of his campaign. Let's be charitable. His campaign's underhand dealings. An absolute libelous campaign. So he lost. So then he went off to Dulwich and became MP there for a little bit before giving that up and coming back. Luckily, he'd made a fortune by this point because of his investments in diamonds and gold in South Africa. He was a member of the South African company. So he'd made a fortune, and he decided that he would sort of spend his retirement at Llangibby Castle. So that's what he did. So for about 20 years, the master of Llangibby, or Llangibby, was this very colourful chap. I don't think we'll ever find out the real story about him and what he got up to with working for Cecil Rhodes in South Africa. But I think he's certainly an intriguing character. He was very pompous. He always used, so to go with all his other qualities, he was very pompous because he always used to tell you within sort of 5 minutes of meeting him, he was descended from a lord, you know. Mr. Rutherford Harris.
Yeah, I'm descended from a lord, you know.
Although he didn't take part in the Llangibby hunt, which had been going really in various stages since 1641, that was still going on in the area. And you can see here the colours of the Llangibby hunt.
Oh.
But as time goes on, you've had it's sort of empty. It's quite interesting. A friend of one of the Adams Williamses was Arthur Machen.
Oh,
and he mentions in his The Terror, the Llangibby Murders.
Oh, really?
And Machen visited Llangibby and was a friend of the family, which is quite intriguing. So various parties still continued. We do know that after Rutherford Harris died in 1920, his poor wife Florence couldn't live without him and died at her own hand just a few months later. So he must have been a good husband, if nothing else. We also know that later on in the 1930s, Lord Tredegar's niece, Lady Hereford's daughter, Eleanor, who'd married an Adams Williams, did live at Llangibby Castle. So it was back in the family, at least up to that stage. But we have seen lots of houses, have we not, Goff, that after the Second World War were pretty much finished.
Yeah.
Happened here. It was ultimately demolished in 1951 to 1952. So they knocked down the mansion, but what we still have here is the farm. The farm is still around, of course, and where those two castles were. So that was a little look at Llangibby, or more properly, Llangibby.
Yeah. And
so
large amount of murder.
And a fair amount of murder, but yeah. But like,
Nice,
yeah, that was
interesting. Yeah, nice, interesting. I never knew those properties, the two castles existed, because you just can't sort of see them from because obviously they're up on a hill and the hill's grown over it, so you can't see it there. Fantastic.
I'd known about, or I'd heard about the Llangibby Murders, because it's very notorious, isn't it? It appears in all kinds of books of that. So I knew that. I'd heard the name of Sir Trevor Williams, but I honestly believe that you can't understand the Civil War in Southeast Wales without knowing something about Sir Trevor Williams. You know, he was this man that clearly everyone respected and yet would stab you in the back if you didn't treat him correctly. So he was a royalist, reluctantly. Then he was a parliamentarian. Then he was back as a royalist for the Second Civil War. And then he went back almost as a parliamentarian and a royalist again. It was said that he declared for King Charles II in 1659.
Oh, right.
Before the restoration of 1660. So he had one last little trademark twist.
Yeah.
Which is about right, isn't it?
You always think he was almost like a third force, wasn't it? He was a force of his own.
Him and his clubman.
The royalists and the parliamentarians, and then you had his lot in the middle, who were just zooming back and forth to whichever side suited them.
It's amazing he survived.
A lot of Civil War situations where you don't actually sit in one camp or the other, you know.
No.
And he was really useful to both sides whenever he swapped sides. That's why they never finished him off.
Yeah, you wanted him on your side. They did slight Llangibby Castle, the actual castle, Tregrug Castle. They did blow up with gunpowder one of the towers there in 1648 to slight it so it couldn't be used again. But I tell you, if you ever get chance to go there and get permission to go there, because it's private land, but people have asked permission and allowed to wander around. They don't have to be Tony Robinson to do so. It's just the vast size of the place that's fascinating. It would have been, if it had been finished, maybe it wasn't, one of the largest castles in England and Wales, and so many people don't know it's there.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Goff. That was great. And I don't know where we'll go next, but we probably need to dip back into Glamorgan, I would have thought. We haven't done a Glamorgan one for a while. So we will be back soon. Do like the video when that helps. Subscribe will be great. We're up to 250 subscribers now, which is very nice. And we'll be back very soon. Thank you.
Yeah. See you then. Bye.